The first time my daughter looked at the dress, she didn't just dislike it. She laughed. Not a soft laugh, not an awkward one, a sharp, cutting laugh that sliced straight through my chest. She held the fabric between two fingers like it was something dirty and said, "Mom, this is a dress for poor people." Those words echoed in my ears long after she walked away. I stood there in the small bedroom of my rented apartment, holding that dress like it was something fragile, not because it was expensive, but because it carried memories, dignity, and a past my daughter clearly wanted to erase. Let me take you back. I'm a 58-year-old widow. I raised my daughter alone after her father died suddenly when she was just 9. Back then, life didn't give us choices, only responsibilities. I worked wherever I could, cleaning homes, stitching clothes, cooking for others. Some days I skipped meals so she could eat better. Some nights I pretended not to be tired so she wouldn't feel guilty asking for help with homework. And through all of that, I never complained. My daughter grew up smart, ambitious, determined to leave that life behind. And she did. She married into money, real money. Her husband came from a family that owned construction companies, rental properties, and luxury cars. Their home looked like something out of a magazine: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and rooms so big they echoed when you spoke. I was proud of her, but somewhere along the way, pride turned into distance. She started correcting how I spoke, criticizing how I dressed, rolling her eyes when I mentioned my old neighborhood. And then came the party. Her husband's family was throwing a grand anniversary celebration, over 200 guests, politicians, business owners, influencers, people who wore confidence like perfume. My daughter called me 3 weeks before the event. "Mom, you have to come," she said, "but please dress properly. This isn't a village gathering." I didn't argue. I went to the local market. Not the malls she shopped at, but the place where shopkeepers still knew my name. After hours of searching, I found it. A simple, elegant dress. Deep navy blue, hand-embroidered neckline, classic cut, timeless. The shopkeeper smiled and said, "Madam, this style never goes out of respect." I bought it. When I showed it to my daughter a few days later, hoping, foolishly, for approval, she laughed. "A dress for poor people," she said. "Don't embarrass me, Mom." Then she walked away. I didn't cry in front of her. I folded the dress carefully, placed it back in its bag, and whispered to myself, "You don't know what this dress really is." Because she didn't know the truth. She didn't know who designed it. She didn't know why I owned it. And she certainly didn't know what would happen when I walked into that party wearing it. The night of the event arrived. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothed the fabric, and looked at my reflection. I didn't see a poor woman. I saw a survivor. I saw a mother. I saw someone who had been underestimated her entire life. And as I stepped into that glittering hall, every conversation slowly stopped. Eyes turned, whispers started, faces changed, and then I saw my daughter. Her smile froze, her hands trembled, her eyes widened in pure shock, and before anyone could say a word, she fainted. The music didn't stop immediately. At first, people thought my daughter had tripped. Then someone screamed her name, and suddenly the entire hall froze. Glasses paused mid-air, laughter died in throats. 200 powerful people stared as my daughter collapsed onto the marble floor like a porcelain doll that had cracked. Her husband rushed forward. A few women knelt beside her. Someone shouted for water. And me? I stood there, still, silent, wearing that dress. I could feel it, the shift in the room, the way attention slowly moved away from my unconscious daughter and settled on me. Whispers started spreading like wildfire. Who is she? Why does that dress look so familiar? Is that? No, it can't be. A tall man with silver hair, someone important judging by how people stepped aside for him, stared at me openly. His eyes narrowed, then widened, as if a memory had just slammed into him. He walked closer, very slowly. My heart beat harder with every step he took. He stopped right in front of me and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Excuse me, where did you get that dress?" The room went dead quiet. I looked him straight in the eye and answered calmly, "I earned it." A ripple went through the crowd. He swallowed and asked again, this time softer. "No, I mean, who made it?" I adjusted the sleeve gently and said the name. A name that hit the room like thunder. A name that didn't belong in small markets or on poor people's dresses. Gasps echoed. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered, "That's impossible." The man stepped back, stunned. "I was there," he said, 25 years ago. That dress was part of a private collection. Only 5 were ever made." My daughter chose that moment to wake up. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked around in confusion. Then her gaze landed on me. On the dress. On the man standing in front of me. Her face drained of color again. "Mom," she whispered, barely audible. What is he talking about?" I finally spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "This dress," I said, "was designed the year your father died." Murmurs spread again. I continued. "Back then, I worked as a cleaner for a fashion house. I swept floors, washed fabrics, stayed invisible." I paused. "Until one night when a designer found me repairing a ruined gown everyone else had given up on." The silver-haired man nodded slowly. "She saved the entire collection," he said quietly. "I remember now." My daughter's hands shook. You never told me this." I met her eyes. "You never asked." The hall felt heavy, like the air itself was listening. "That designer," I continued, "gave me this dress as payment, not money, this dress, because he said something I never forgot." I smiled faintly. "He said, 'One day this dress will remind the world who you really are.'" A woman in the crowd whispered, "My God, that's an original." Another added, "Do you know what that's worth today?" I looked back at my daughter. She couldn't even meet my eyes. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the price. This was about respect. And she had just lost hers. The music restarted, but it sounded wrong, too loud, too forced, like it was trying to cover up something everyone now felt but couldn't ignore. My daughter was helped onto a velvet chair near the stage. Her husband stood beside her, pale and confused, glancing between her and me like he was watching 2 worlds collide. Guests pretended to sip drinks while listening carefully. No one left. They wanted the story, and I was done hiding it. I took a slow breath and said, "You all see a dress, but I see nights without sleep. I see hands cracked from detergent. I see a woman who had to choose between pride and survival." I looked at my daughter. "You were 10 years old. You don't remember the eviction notice taped to our door, or the week we lived on lentils and bread because I spent my last savings on your school books." Her eyes filled with tears, not dramatic ones, but quiet, ashamed tears. "I worked at that fashion house for 4 years," I continued. "I never told anyone who I was. I cleaned floors by day and repaired garments by night, unpaid, because I wanted to learn." The silver-haired man spoke again, his voice full of respect now. "She refused overtime pay," he said. "Said she was already being paid, with knowledge." Murmurs spread again. I nodded.
One evening, a model tripped. A gown worth more than my yearly salary tore apart minutes before a show. Everyone panicked. I smiled softly at the memory. I asked for a needle. The room leaned in. I worked for 6 hours straight, no breaks, no applause. When the designer saw the final stitch, he cried. My daughter covered her face. "That gown saved his reputation," I said, "and this dress was his thank you." I turned fully to her now. "When you laughed at it, you didn't insult fabric. You insulted every sacrifice I made so you'd never have to live that life." Her husband finally spoke, his voice tight. "Why didn't I know any of this?" He asked her, not me. She shook her head slowly. "Because I didn't want you to," she whispered. That hurt more than anything else. I stepped closer to her. "You were ashamed of where you came from," I said gently, "but that place built you." She looked up at me, tears streaming now. "I thought if I erased the past, I'd belong more here." The hall stayed silent. I placed my hand over hers. Belonging doesn't come from pretending, it comes from honoring. One of the older women in the audience stood up and said, "I've attended fashion weeks across Europe. That embroidery technique hasn't existed for decades." Another added, "She's wearing history." I smiled. Yes, and history doesn't ask for permission to enter the room. My daughter stood up slowly, still shaky. She looked at the guests, at her husband, at me, and for the first time in years, she bowed her head. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "Mom, I was cruel." The apology hung in the air, but the story wasn't over, because the final truth, the one that would change everything between us, hadn't been spoken yet. And when it was, no one would ever look at poor people the same way.
Just when the room thought the story had reached its peak, life decided to pull the curtain back even further. The silver-haired man cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said. Every head turned toward him. He looked at my daughter, then at her husband, and finally at the guests seated near the stage, influential people, decision-makers, investors. "That designer," he continued, "didn't just give her the dress." My daughter stiffened. "He offered her a partnership." Gasps erupted. I felt my daughter's fingers tighten around mine. "Yes," the man said, "he wanted her to stay, to train, to become part of the house." The room buzzed with disbelief. My daughter turned to me, eyes wide. "You never told me that either." I nodded slowly. "Because I refused." The silence this time was heavier than before. I had a child at home, a grieving little girl who needed her mother more than the world needed another designer. Her husband exhaled sharply. "So you walked away? From all of that?" he asked. "Yes." I smiled, though my eyes burned. I chose bedtime stories over runway lights, packed lunches over fashion weeks, you over fame. My daughter broke down completely. People shifted uncomfortably. Some wiped their eyes. Others stared at the floor, suddenly very aware of their own choices. The silver-haired man added quietly, "If what you're saying is true, then that dress isn't just rare." He paused. "It's priceless." I shook my head gently. "No," I said, "its value isn't measured in money." My daughter stood up again, stronger this time. She turned to the guests and said something that shocked everyone. "My mother was never poor," she said. "She was rich in ways I was too blind to see." She faced me. "I spent years trying to prove I belonged here," she said, gesturing around the hall. "But tonight,
I realize you always did." Her husband stepped forward and took my hand respectfully. "I'm sorry for not knowing, for not asking." I nodded. Apologies don't erase the past, but they open doors to the future. Then my daughter did something no one expected. She unclipped her diamond necklace, the one worth more than my entire apartment, and placed it gently around my neck. "Wear this, not to impress anyone, but to remind me." Cameras flashed, phones recorded. By morning, this story would be everywhere. But the most important moment hadn't happened yet.
The next morning, the story exploded. Photos of me in the navy blue dress flooded social media. Fashion bloggers analyzed every stitch. News outlets argued over its value. Strangers called me an icon. But that wasn't what made my daughter faint. It wasn't the designer's name. It wasn't the rarity. It wasn't even the money. It was recognition. For the first time in her adult life, my daughter realized something terrifying. She hadn't escaped her past. She had erased it, and in doing so, she erased me. When the guests left and the hall emptied, my daughter and I sat alone on the stage steps. "I was scared," she admitted quietly. "Scared that if people knew where I came from, they'd see me differently." I looked at her and said the words I wish someone had told me years ago. They will, and that's okay, because the right people will see you better. She cried then, not out of embarrassment, but relief. That night changed her. Not instantly, not magically, but deeply. She started introducing me differently. "This is my mother," she'd say proudly, "the woman who raised me alone." She stopped correcting my accent, stopped apologizing for my presence, stopped hiding her roots. Months later, she hosted another event. This time, she insisted I sit beside her. Someone asked her quietly, "Isn't your mother from humble beginnings?" She smiled and answered without hesitation, "Yes, and that's exactly why she's extraordinary." As for the dress, I still own it. It hangs in my closet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that dignity doesn't come from labels, that wealth doesn't always sparkle, and that the people we look down on often carry stories powerful enough to stop a room cold. Because sometimes the dress isn't what shocks people.